Before we get into the test, let me show you why this matters. This truck had low rail pressure. The shop had replaced the rail relief valve, the rail pressure sensor, and ordered another $3,000 worth of parts. The lift pump, unit pumps, the whole works just to fix this issue. They called me in last minute just to double check that it needed those parts. One leak test later, turned out the brand new relief valve they just installed was the problem. So let me show you how I figured it out. In this video, we're walking through a step-by-step high-pressure fuel system test on an MX-13 engine. The particular engine I'm using for this demonstration is inside a Kenworth T680. This procedure is used when diagnosing a crank no start, hard start, or any time you have low common rail pressure. Be sure to verify you have good low side fuel pressure first, and only perform this test if you've checked the basics already. This is the test you go to if you're trying to pinpoint a leaky injector, a stuck relief valve, or a weak high pressure pump. Let's talk a little bit about some of the tools we're going to need. Here shown we have the PACCAR 1961366. This is their total fuel diagnostic kit. This is going to have everything you need to test the MX-11 and the MX-13 engines, and it's going to include a lot more than just a high side fuel pressure system leak detection kit. It's going to have things to test the low side, filter restriction, all that good stuff. But this price tag is pretty high, so if all you want to do is test the high side fuel pressure for a leakage, there are aftermarket alternatives. Essentially what we're going to need is we're going to need a couple of injector block offs. I recommend having this regardless if you're doing this test or not. We're going to need a hose to attach to the common rail relief pipe. We're going to need a couple of graduated cylinders to measure the fuel coming out. We're going to need injector leak gallery adapter, and we're going to need a block off along with a hose to capture all this fuel as well. So this injector leak gallery adapter is probably going to be the hardest one to make, but it is possible if you're motivated enough. So overall, we're going to be attaching two lines to the high side, or the return of the high side fuel pressure system. We're then going to measure that fuel and determine what components are leaking, if any. So here we have a diagram of the fuel flow on an MX-13 engine. In red we have our return fuel, and in blue is the fuel going in. Everything after the unit pumps here is high pressure fuel. So here we can see our injectors, and here we can see our common rail. Our first test location is going to be at the common rail relief pipe. So we're going to remove the pipe, and we're going to attach our hose there, and we're going to measure the fuel coming out of there. Our next test location is going to be at the injector leak gallery. As you can see here, we're measuring from the front. So there's an Allen key here. We're going to remove that and attach that adapter tool we saw before, and we're going to put that to a container. And then next we need to remove this banjo nut at the end, and we're going to block that off of the plug that we saw before as well. So that way any fuel that is being returned by these injectors is going to go out the front leak gallery port, and it's going to go into our container. So here we have a drawing of our first collection point. You can see the common rail down here. We have our relief valve here, and we have our pipe here. The goal is going to be to get this pipe off so that we can attach our hose here and we can collect the fuel. To do that without bending this pipe, you're going to want to loosen these two P-clamp nuts so that the pipe can come up a little bit. We're also going to need to remove this nut here holding down the line to the chassis engine fuel interface, and we're going to take off a couple of nuts along the wiring harness to get some space to really get at these two nuts back here. So here are the bolts at the bottom you're going to want to loosen, because this whole assembly we're going to need to pull it back a little bit so we can get at those two P-clamp nuts at the back. And here you can see we have our hose attached there, and down here we see those two nuts, and there's a couple more down the line. So once we get that off, we can push back this harness and we can get at those two nuts there, take them off, and then we can remove the relief pipe just enough so that we can get the test hose in there, and we block off that pipe. Everything here is torqued at 30 Newton meters, and we're blocking this off because we don't want any contamination in that system, and there also may be some fuel trying to get back out and make a mess. Now our next leak detection point is going to be at the front gallery, and like we said, it is an Allen key. It's going to be at the front of the engine. We're going to remove this Allen key. We're going to take that adapter piece and we're going to thread that in there, and then we're going to use this other piece, plug the normal return in the back, and then we're going to collect that fuel. Here we can see the adapter piece. That's going to go where that Allen key went. This is the front of the engine, this is the fan. And here we can see it installed. That's going to be torqued to 12 inch-pounds. And here we have on the back, this is where we're going to block off the port for the normal fuel injector return. So we're going to remove this banjo nut, catch the O-ring that comes off of it, and we're going to install this block off. And we're also going to torque that to 12 inch-pounds. This tether that's attached to it is going to go around and loop around where that adapter was in the front. That's just there to hold everything in place and not let anything fly into the fan. Now that we have all our connections made, it's time for us to bleed the fuel system. I prefer to use the hand primer on the system itself just because I can feel the air being compressed, but you can also use an external bleeding system. Now that you have all that set up and all those things are running to the beakers, we're going to begin our test. This particular truck that I'm testing on, it did not start. This was a crank no start, so I'm using the DAVIE test to check the injection system during cranking. But depending on your symptoms, you might not even need to run a bidirectional test. You may just be able to start the engine or crank the engine over. Always consult your troubleshooting and follow the directions there. So now that we understand what the test is trying to accomplish, let's see if we can figure out a way to not perform this test and gather similar info. So, of course, make sure that the condition you're troubleshooting is low common rail pressure and that your low side fuel pressure is good and that you don't have any electrical faults. Then we're going to remove the fuel rail relief pipe, and we're going to have a second person crank it, or you could put a clear plastic hose over the fitting. But you want the engine to crank or start if it does start, and you're just looking to see, is there any fuel coming out of there? Make sure you understand how that valve is supposed to operate, because that sometimes it will have a controlled leak, such as during uncontrolled high fuel pressure if it's in limp home mode. But for the most part, you shouldn't see any fuel coming out of there. So if you have fuel coming out of there, stop. You know your issue's in there. There's no reason to hook up a line to the injector gallery. Now let's say you don't have any fuel coming out of there. You only really have two possible options now. It's either the unit pumps aren't generating enough pressure or your injectors are returning too much fuel. If your engine starts, then it may be worth it to electrically cut out the injectors one by one to see if it makes a dent in the rail pressure. More often though, it's the static injector bag leak that drops the pressure, and to diagnose this, you'll need to hydraulically isolate the injectors with the block-off tool we talked about before. So you're going to go one by one and see the change it makes on the rail pressure. If none make any significant change, then it's time to attach the test hoses and perform a unit pump test to further isolate the issue.